Hello and welcome to Insiders, a podcast all about the world of television with me, Jimmy Mulville.
And me, Peter Fincham.
This is the podcast for people who love TV and want to know a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes in show business.
So, Jim, a bit of news that caught my eye, actually, it kind of struck me as kind of interesting. A nationwide study of 2,000 adults has found that 54% of people admitted to exaggerating, fabricating or playing down their viewing habits. The reasons given were split evenly between trying to appear to be smarter, cooler or more in the know than they actually are. Those all seem to me to be the same, basically.
So they were honest. There was an anonymous survey and they got honest answers.
Yeah, but there's interesting things in this. People apparently much prefer sitting down to watch something familiar rather than stuff that's challenging or edgy or in any way prestige in inverted commas. And you know, I think the familiar gets at something which in the modern world of everything's available all the time is an interesting challenge for us. We've worked all our career, you could argue, in a world of television where people have encouraged you to come to them with new ideas. Now, that's what commissioners are for. You go and you say, I've got a new idea for a sitcom or a panel show or a documentary or whatever. But now that everything's available to everybody all the time, do we end up in a world where people want to watch what they already know over and over again? And does this threaten new television and new ideas? Because when we were making new programs, let's say back in the 90s, it wasn't very easy to watch old programs. No. You had to go and buy a VHS cassette or something. And just as interesting is, do people lie when you ask them questions in surveys and say, oh, my favourite programme ever was The Ascent of Man or something?
I loved Civilization. But actually, fact, I'm watching New Tricks.
What they really liked, exactly, was The Golden Shot or The X Factor or whatever. So
I think what
do we think?
Well, I think that I know that I have some guilty secrets, the things that I watch. My youngest son and I, who's now in his 20s, and Karen, we'd sometimes get hooked on Border Security Australia.
Oh, yeah.
Now, so we just watch hours and hours of people coming in from Cambodia and Thailand with suitcases full of noodles.
And border security, I mean, Australia's an island, so they haven't even got a physical border with any other country.
I watched one where a grandmother who's in a wheelchair coming in from Cambodia with their family.
Let me guess.
They run a scanner over, and the scanner goes nuts.
Of course.
And then so they do a strip search, this poor old woman, thinking she's lagged with heroin. And she's not. She's trying to smuggle in nearly $20,000 of Australian currency, which is strapped to her body. And I watched this show thinking,
that's a bit cold to Newcastle. Why would you want to smuggle Australian currency into Australia?
I don't know. But it certainly was against the law, as the Australian Border Security pointed out to her and said, you're in big trouble now, madam. She was kind of nodding away, this poor old lady. I think her family probably strapped her up with the cash and sent her off thinking they wouldn't possibly pick up on a and then another family coming in from the Middle East, the woman said, do you have any nuts in your bag? No nuts. She opens the suitcase. It's just full of confectionery from the Lebanon, which is just nuts everywhere. And anyway, that's my guilty secret, is that we would, and also we'd watch...
be that much money
in
Lebanese
Shark Week.
Lebanese confectionery. I mean, if you're going to smuggle and take a risk, for God's sake, at least take heroin or cocaine or something.
But this was just a nice family.
And the margins are much better.
There was probably presents. It was probably presents from their relatives saying, "Take some Saudi Arabian nuts home with you."
Yeah, exactly. When you start trying to sell those on street corners, I think you're going to find you've taken a big risk for no good reason.
But people do. I mean, like for example, we did some research on audience viewing on the iPlayer because we wanted to find out how Havok News was doing. Along the way, we found out my friend Stephen Price, who's a friend of this podcast, the great analyst, he did some work and he said, do you know how many people watched Succession over the course of a week when Sky does repeated viewing? How many people watch Succession?
And I reckon the answer is going to be fewer than you think.
What do you think?
I don't know, 2 million?
1 million people.
1 million.
And yet we all talked about it because the Chatterati loved it and the media loved it. So you would assume Yeah, like, for example, back in the day, I was surprised how few people watched Chris Evans's Thank God It's Friday, and yet it was a brilliant show.
Well, in that era on Channel 4, we made at TalkBack the Ali G show.
Yeah.
And that was a spin-off of the 11 o'clock show, if you remember. And the Ali G show, I was working with Sacha Baron Cohen at the time, and in an incredibly short space of time, he went from being a bloke who could come in on the bus, as it were, unrecognised by anybody, to being seemingly the most famous comedian in the UK. If you walk down a street with him, people mobbed him. And I don't think his ratings ever got above about 1.2 million views. And you thought, what? And this is before the internet. This is the late 90s. There's no YouTube. There's no way of kind of, just sort of watching clips virally, which was how we would do it today. So how did that happen? What did that tell you about BARB, which is the organisation that measures
What does that stand
viewing?
for, by the way? BARB.
BARB, I do not know, but I can tell that Owen's about to find out. So
BARB.
watch this space. We'll come back to it.
I mean, it's not short for the woman who invented it, Barbara.
It could be. But for those who don't know what it is, BARB traditionally has assessed viewing, and this has always been an odd thing, that something culty on Channel 4 that gets 1.5 million viewers can seem to be much more famous than something that's getting 11 million viewers on ITV, a game show or whatever, that nobody's talking about at all.
Because it's like what they used to call moving wallpaper. I mean, some shows are on and they're comforting, and you have them on, you can do other things, and some shows are quite compelling. And Ali G, I would say, was quite groundbreaking and sets a conversation going.
Yeah, but still, it didn't play to very large audiences. And I remember when I did the McTaggart lecture in Edinburgh, which I think was in 2008.
We're still talking about it, Peter.
Well, I am. I made this point because Ofcom had done some survey, and they'd asked viewers, do you regard, I can't remember the exact figures, but do you regard television as something fundamentally entertaining or educational? And some ridiculous number of people had said educational. Sort of 52% of people said, oh, it's an educational medium. I thought, no, it isn't. You come home of an evening and you turn it on to be entertained. And you may find out things at the same time, but fundamentally you're wanting it to keep you entertained, and when it ceases to keep you entertained, you'll turn it off. And I think that's why, if you look at these lists, and there have been lists recently of most favourite, most important programmes of the last 70 years, you will find things like Civilization and The Ascent of Man. But on the whole, that is not the role that television plays in people's lives.
Now, important news is Owen has found out what BARB stands for. And BARB stands for Broadcasters Audience Research Board. We could have worked that out, couldn't we?
That's a bit like BMW standing for Bavarian Motorworks. In other words,
is that what it stands for?
Yes, it's very obvious when you think about it. Did you not know that, Jim?
No, I didn't.
Oh, well, there you are. You learn a new thing
I can't afford
every day.
BMWs, Peter. Well, this whole discussion about watching shows that you shouldn't be watching is you and I over the years have watched shows which we've envied. And we thought this week, instead of looking at a piece of topical TV news, you and I would visit the idea of the shows we didn't make that we wished we'd made.
Yes.
Because I think that there are shows, as a producer, you look at something and think, God, that's a really great show, and you kind of admire it and slightly envy it and feel slightly bereft that you didn't make it.
Yes.
And so we thought we'd just talk about that and talk about maybe a comedy that you wish you'd made.
Well, I mean, the truth is there's so many, because there's so many great comedies. But a comedy which I think is sort of relevant today, even though it's 20 years old now, and actually relevant to what we were talking about last week when we were talking about Jimmy Kimmel and Donald Trump and everything, The Thick of It.
Yes.
That's a fantastic comedy.
That's on my list.
Because and I'm going to group with it Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, because they both play an incredible role in comedy history, but they are, and I'm slightly contradicting what we were talking about last week, they are an example of where comedy and politics kind of interact to create something purely entertaining, you might say, which isn't preachy. It's not like it's not like trying to persuade you to a political point of view, but tells you some underlying truth about the way the world works, government works. And
Armando Iannucci is, I think, I first met him when he was a radio producer. I tried to get him to produce Have I Got News for You? And he said, I'm staying here to do 2 programs, Knowing Me, Knowing You, and On the Hour. And if you actually asked me which TV programs I wish I'd produced, produced the TV versions of those, but you fucking beat me to it.
And do you know why?
Why?
Because when they came round for the meeting with us, which I think was the day after the meeting with you, we served them coffee in one of those things, do you call it a cafetiere, where you got a plunger? And they were very impressed with the coffee. And apparently you gave them instant coffee in a polystyrene, what do you call it, a styrofoam cup. Yeah. And so they thought, well, go here, the coffee's better.
And I got their names wrong.
And you got their names wrong.
Yeah,
exactly.
Apart from that,
insulted them to their face.
But you produced 2 of my favourite shows. I mean, I think, and it gave birth to Alan Partridge, which has become such a kind of fixture in our comedy consciousness, and the brilliant Chris Morris, who for me is just a genius.
Although Alan Partridge, TalkBack, which I left 20 years ago, but TalkBack didn't hang on to Alan Partridge, and Alan Partridge has been made by Steve Coogan's own company. It's been made by other companies, so it exists kind of. It exists despite whoever makes it, and I completely agree. Alan, if you were to try to kind of say which comedy character, this is not the question we're supposed to be addressing, but it's a perfectly good one to address. Comedy character defines our lifetimes. I'd put Alan Partridge at the top of that list.
Like you, when we set ourselves the challenge of coming up with a comedy we wish we'd made, there are just so many, and The Thick of It was on my list too. And but I think that if we're broadening it to like America, then there are so many. Cheers, for example, I was completely obsessed with. In fact, we talked about watching old shows just now. My son and I, Joe, we watched old episodes of Cheers during COVID. It kind of kept us going, and it was just the writing and the performances. Ted Danson and Kelsey Grammer, Frasier, just sitting at the end of the bar, and then they spin him off into his own series, which win Emmy after Emmy after Emmy. But I think there are 2 shows I want to talk about. One is a modern show, Afterlife.
Afterlife's an extraordinary show.
Yeah, and it shows Ricky Gervais in a softer mood. Yes. And it's also got fantastically funny lines. Like, the story of Afterlife, if you haven't seen it, is that he has recently lost his wife, and she's left him a series of videos that he watches every night, giving him hints on how to make the house work and to feed the dog. The cast is absolutely handpicked by Ricky Gervais. It's such a bespoke show. And I think it's a kind of love letter that Ricky's writing, I think, maybe to his own relationship, I don't know, but it's a beautiful kind of thesis that he bases the show on. But then it's peppered with Ricky Gervais lines, which are so out there and on the edge. So it's bittersweet, and I just think it's a brilliant.
But do you not think?
I wish I'd made that.
No, of course, and I get that, and you've made programs that I wish I'd been involved in, like Father Ted or, Drop the Dead Donkey shows, or Derry Girls would be a perfect example. But isn't this partly what as independent producers, it kind of spurs us on?
Yeah.
Which is watching programs and thinking, oh, damn, they got there first. Yeah. They had that idea.
Here's a comedy I do want to talk about, which I grew up with. And looking back, of course, at the time, I didn't think, I wish I'd made that. But I just thought I'd bring it up because I thought, I wonder would it get commissioned today? And that was a show which we did used to watch on the BBC. One of the few shows.
The only time you turned over to the BBC?
It was one of the few times. It was Till Death Us Do Part.
Oh, God, yeah.
Now, for those of you who've never experienced Till Death Us Do Part, it had a brilliant actor called Warren Mitchell at the centre of it. He's married to Dandy Nichols, again, a brilliant character actor. And they live with her daughter.
And Sherry Blair's dad.
Una Stubbs.
Yes.
And with Sherry Blair's dad, Tony. So there's a generational thing. It's the 1960s. They are progressive, the younger couple. They're inclusive, they're liberal. And Warren Mitchell is an old school, working class, nationalist Tory. And he says the most bigoted things you could possibly say. And people are laughing at him. And I think these days the broadcaster would worry about his opinions because they'd say, but he's saying pretty unsavory things. We're saying, yes, he is. And people are laughing at him. We're pointing out that people like this are slightly ridiculous. But I don't think it would get made these days, would it?
Well, it's a very interesting kind of thought. I mean, as a character, and Warren Mitchell played him absolutely brilliant, but Alf Garnett was racist.
Yeah.
Kind of conservative with a small c. socially conservative. He didn't like the 60s and all things like liberalism and
permissiveness. What he was railing against was change, wasn't it? And the 60s was a massive area of change.
What I think you could... Yeah,
but it was written by Johnny Speight, a Brit writer, who was very left-wing.
Yes.
He was writing it from a left-wing perspective, saying, these are dinosaurs, these people, and...
But they were funny dinosaurs,
and they're funny dinosaurs, and the world's changing, and they don't like it, and he says ridiculous things. The audience are laughing at him. And he became a very popular character. So there's an ambiguity there, isn't it? We love the character, and he says hateful things. Can you do that these days on modern television?
I don't.
Jeremy Clarkson is.
I was about to say, I think you can. I think you can, but I think there's another thing in there, which is, as we've started talking about this, programs we would like to have made, we're on comedies and we're on sitcoms, and I think there's a reason for that because, and I think I remember reading this or hearing this said by Stephen Fry, and I thought it was a very astute observation. You could tell the story of modern Britain through great sitcom characters.
I agree with him.
Like Alf Garnett, or
Only
Basil Fawlty, even Hyacinth Bouquet, whatever. You tell the story of modern Britain through sitcoms more than you could through drama.
I agree.
Enough. Important as drama is, it doesn't tend. There are exceptions like Boys from the Black Stuff and Yossa and Gets a Job and all that kind of stuff. But sitcoms has a way of reflecting the world. So to go back to where we started with The Thick of It and Yes Prime Minister or Yes Minister, both great shows, and they tell different truths that are right for their era. So the truth that Yes Minister tells is that the show is run by civil servants, Sir Humphrey. And by the way, since we're talking about this, let's give a plug to our old friend Griff Rhys-Jones, who's about to play the Paul Eddington character in the West End production of Yes Prime Minister. Book your seats now. So that's the truth that Yes Minister tells. Go forward 20 years, and The Thick of It tells another story, which is that the strings are pulled by the guy in charge of comms, PR, Alistair Campbell, basically. Spin.
The Spin
Malcolm
Doctor.
Tucker. The civil servants have gone out of the picture completely. They don't seem to matter at all, but the Spin Doctor runs everything. And I think that's a fascinating kind of change in the world of politics and the world of government. But in both cases, they're telling the audience sort of over and over again what they want to hear, which is the people in power aren't in power. Other people are in power.
And in that sense, they are truly satirical.
Yes.
They are telling the truth through humour, which I say, Havoc News does topical humour. It's there's an element of satire, but those shows are truly satirical because they're painting a picture of, actually, they're telling the truth about what's happening in our society in a really entertaining and funny way. And I agree with Stephen Fry, is that sitcoms, a bit like music, they provide a soundtrack to our lives, is that we can plot our lives through sitcom as we can with our favourite albums.
You can now, but
and it's a shame. Maybe just put a plug in for comedy. It's a shame that broadcasters don't acknowledge that. It's always my theory is there aren't enough people at the very top who understand that. Yeah,
but to make a point of where music and television divides and goes into, and I don't know what you can do about this. So, the 60s, great music in the 60s. You still listen to it today. It sounds great. The Beatles sounds great. Lots of other music sounds great. Would you watch Till Death Us Do Part today? I don't think so, because the production values perish. It's, I don't want to say it's unwatchable, but it's grainy and black and white.
You'd watch it as a museum piece.
You'd watch it as a museum piece, and there comes a moment, and we can circle back again to our kids all watching Friends. There comes a moment when production values stabilise in a way that a show doesn't look that old-fashioned when you watch it. I'm guessing it's not even till like the 2000s when you go from SD to HD. Things are shot in HD. They still look just as good today as they did then. And maybe it's the late 90s or whatever. Because I'm sure you could watch The Office today without worrying about it. But Till Death Us Do Part, unfortunately, it's like a museum piece. Now, could you do anything about it is an interesting thing.
Technically.
That's what I'm coming to. So on this list of programs we wish we made or programs we absolutely love, on my list, this is moving to drama, is the original series of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy
Oh, yes.
with Alec Guinness. In my mind...
Produced by Jonathan Powell.
Produced by Jonathan. In my mind, much better than the movie with Gary Oldman, brilliant as Gary Oldman is. And I know Slow Horses has just come back, and that'll be on some future list of great shows. But the original television series, and when I was at the BBC... in the mid-2000s, I didn't broadcast, I was running BBC One, but BBC Four, I think, broadcast it again. And I watched it, and it looked a bit shit. In other words, just the look of it was not very good. And I remember having a conversation with somebody and saying, why can't we do what they do to movies and restore it to its... It was shot on film. It would have been shot on 16mm film. Why can't we restore it to its pristine glory? And here's the answer. Whereas with a movie, like a James Bond movie, they've absolutely kept the negative. And so they can at any time strike a new print from the negative that looks as if you shot it yesterday. They didn't do that with television drama. They kept it on tape, 1-inch tape, I think it might have been. They destroyed the negative. And so the 1-inch tape would have decayed and deteriorated over the years, rather like news footage. So if you watch news footage from the 80s, it's a bit kind of grainy and low definition, low resolution. And I thought, what a shame that is. And I'm sure you could expensively kind of digitally enhance it and make it look as good as you can, but you'll never make it look that good. And I suspect that means that something like Till Death Us Do Part will forever be a museum piece in a museum, and it won't find a new audience.
Well, it's interesting because we're drifting into drama, and I have a drama which I watched when I was at university, and I would go around to a friend's house, and we watched it because we were both doing classics. We were both doing classics at Cambridge, and it was I, Claudius.
Oh, yeah. Now,
I, Claudius is interesting because I'd like to remake that, but I think someone's beaten me to it. So I think someone's got the option.
Somebody told me they got the option. Yeah. I know exactly who as well. Jane Tranter?
It's Jane Tranter.
But I don't think she's yet raised the money to do it, or if she has.
She'll do a great job on it. I mean, I'm sure.
Brilliant.
But and what's so interesting about it is that because I loved the show so much, I kind of did a bit of research about it, and it was written by a man called Jack Pullman, I think.
But based on the Robert Graves novels, which I've read. Have you ever read the novels?
Yes.
Oh, God, they're wonderful novels.
Claudius
the God. Yeah.
And, the theme is that it's Claudius, the emperor, who's telling his story. And he tells the story of the emperors that preceded him. So you begin with Augustus, played by Brian Blessed.
Yes.
And booming voice of Brian Blessed. And Livia
Claudius is played by Derek Jacobi.
Yes, and it's played by the brilliant Derek Jacobi.
Sian Phillips plays his very wayward wife.
And Sian Phillips plays Livia.
Yeah.
And of course, it's all based on Suetonius, the historian, who was, if you wrote an essay about him at university, it was Suetonius is the news of the world reporter of his day. He was very scurrilous, so it's ideal for drama. So the cast do a read-through of this script, and they're confused. They don't know how to play it. And Sian Phillips says in a documentary, we just didn't know how to do it. And Jack Pullman said, it's easy. Think mafia. It's the mafia.
Yes.
And David Chase, who wrote The Sopranos, many, many years later, said he was inspired by I, Claudius. And the character of Livia, guess what the name of Tony Soprano's mother is? It's Livia.
Really?
Yeah. So I think I, Claudius gives birth to The Sopranos, to Game of Thrones.
Yeah, which are the gangster soaps of
Yeah.
the modern Gomorrah. Have you seen Gomorrah, the Italian one, which is a brilliant series, and many others. No, I think that's.
And if you watch
true.
I, Claudius in its original form, I think it looks a bit shonky.
Yes.
Because it's in a set. And like when Brian Blessed goes out into the Colosseum, the camera is on Brian Blessed and Livia, and the sound effect is of 100,000 Romans going, yes! But we don't see them. But these days, with new technology and all those wonderful things like CGI, you could flesh that out really well. Anyway, so going back to I, Claudius, when they did that, what you have in the set is you have them doing a scene in the atrium, in the courtyard, and then what happens is the camera just, as it would in a movie, just just pans slightly and you see someone behind a pillow listening. So it's a very precinctly show. But I think if you watched it now, you would have to forgive it a little bit in terms of production value. It's still a great story. And so I hope Jane Tranter can pull it off.
Anyway, that's enough from us this week. Thank you very much for listening. And any questions about the world of television you've always wanted to ask, send them our way. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, you can contact us on email or via our socials, or even better, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel and see us in living colour.
With good production values.
Yeah, and fantastic lighting. Bye.
Thanks for listening.